Hello,
Goodness,
everyone.
hello everyone.
Yeah, this is part two of our mini series. Not 100% sure how many episodes there's going to be of us doing this. One or two more after this, I think. So last time we talked about serial fiction in a sort of historical little overview and how it ended up being where it is today. And today we are going to be talking about sort of the initial planning stages, like preparation for doing a serial, ideas, what kind of serial you could do, like what are the options if you're doing it these days. And we publish our serials online, so that's very much our focus. Um, and yeah, we'll get started. I think.
Yeah,
Should we
let's do it.
kick off? Yeah. So some fundamentals up front, because I think some people approach serials very differently, have different ideas of what it is and what it could be. I know when I've talked with Eleanor Anstruther, she thinks I'm completely mad the way I do it, for example. Um, so I think in terms of initial questions to ask, like one thing I'd say is, does your story make sense as a serial? Because I think we sort of touched on it last time, but serials can be quite a specific thing. Like it's a particular form. It has certain structural uh, things going on that are not the same as a novel necessarily. Like a novel is something that is singular and someone picks it up and they can read it at their own pace. A serial is in chunks over a long period of time and has to keep people's attention in potentially different ways. So that was kind of question number one, I suppose, Sally. And I don't know what you think about that. Like when you've got a project, how do you sometimes think, oh, this would be a great novel, or this would be a good short story, or this would be a great serial? How do you like figure that one out?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about that recently for some different projects that are on my mind right now, and I think it is tricky because you start with maybe a gem of an idea, and I think it's a serial in my for me anyway. I can only speak for myself. I know it's a serial when I could see a short fiction, like a short story written around it that absolutely could keep going. It's almost like I can start with a chunk that feels pretty satisfying, but like these characters have more that like I could go further with that, right? Um a lot of the time a good serial in my opinion starts with like characters who are motivated in some way and want something, and you know that it would be fun to follow them through whatever the adventure is that gets them to that point. Now, I say that because I'm a very character driven writer anyway. So I think that might be different if somebody is starting from a world, like if they have an interesting idea for a world and they want to set characters in it, that's a slightly different topic. Like I think for me it has to start with the people because that is what I find interesting about serials, and that's what I think the readers that I've built around me are interested in, is following interesting characters from place to place, right? Um So yeah, when you start with a gem of an idea, it that's the first question, you're right, is like, could I follow these people long term? Or is this just like one and done? The story can be told in 5,000 words or less, and it could be like a fun little one off. And like maybe I come back to them later. Um, or will it require a little more meat to get to the heart of what this story is?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there are some novels where if you can pick up the novel and read it in, depending on your reading speed, read it in a couple of days, read it in a week in quite an intensive burst. Sometimes for that novel's story, that is the best way to consume that story.
Mhm.
Whereas a serial will take place over weeks or months, potentially years. And it's not under the reader's control in quite the same way because it depends how the creator is publishing those chapters. So yeah, can your story kind of flex over that time? Is it a story where if there's a week gap in between chapters, will readers be interested in coming back to that? And I think kind of an associated question here is, and it's kind of the big one, I suppose, is do you write the whole thing first and then do your serial? or do you write it and publish it as you go? And this is where Eleanor thinks I'm crazy, because I basically write and publish as I go. So I'm writing stuff and putting it out. I haven't got the whole thing done and dusted yet. So you're kind of laying the train tracks as you go. Eleanor very much, writes a manuscript, and then serializes it after that. So she knows it's totally sorted. It's all good. There's nothing that's going to break because it kind of already exists. And if you have a manuscript, it could go off and become a novel, or you can then take that and do it as a serial. What's your approach?
Unfortunately, you and I are the same, which might make for slightly less interesting conversation when it comes to a contrast. But I also am a
Maybe
bit
it's
of
just the best way.
I think so. But also I'm recognizing I'm an adrenaline writer. I like the adrenaline. I like the feeling of having to figure it out. I like being forced to solve the puzzles as I go. That has worked very well for me. I just find that my energy flags if I'm trying to write the whole thing privately first and then piece it out. I also think that part of kind of the serial conversation. So right now I am revising one of my past serials into a novel. And something that's been interesting as a reverse engineer of the conversation we're having is that I'm undoing some of the serial work that I did on that serial, where each chapter, as I'm reading it now, each chapter doesn't feel like a chapter in a book. It feels like the episode of a TV show. It's very monster of the week, mini arc, there's a beginning, middle, and end in each chunk.
Yeah.
Whereas a chapter has that, but a chapter of a novel can also kind of pop to a different place for a little while, or take you on a different angle of something. Or I'm thinking, for some reason, what's in my head is Grapes of Wrath, Steinbeck, right? There's a whole chapter devoted to selling jalopies, right? And it's a great chapter, right? It's actually a really interesting chapter because it adds to the whole of the story. But it would make a terrible serial chapter. People would be like, "What was that?" Why
Yeah.
did the author decide to do that? So I think serials do need to stay on target in a way that novels don't have to. So as I'm reading back over my own, I'm thinking what are some places that I can expand and add some things back in, and maybe mess with some of the arcs that I've created and kind of weave them together. But I wouldn't think that when I was writing as a serial, because I wanted each piece to feel compelling on its own
Yeah.
so that people want to come back next week.
Yeah. And a chapter in a novel doesn't have to be something that is standalone and sustainable by itself in some way, whereas a chapter or an episode in a serial, whether it's a written serial or a television show or a comic or anything like that, an individual part does have to, in some way, live by itself as well. It might not make complete sense. It's going to be a lot better taken as part of the serial, but when someone sits down to read or watch or listen to that particular bit, you want them to come away from it slightly satisfied, because you want them to come back for the next one. Whereas, and if it's just a kind of doesn't really have a start, middle, and end, then there's no guarantee that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I want to bring back something I mentioned in the first part to this, which is kind of that difference, because we talked a lot in the first part about the difference in different kinds of serialized stories, and I think that's where you start seeing the difference between something like the X-Files, where it is very monster of the week. Some of the later ones may be connected, but early on, it was very each episode stands pretty much on its own, and you can enjoy an episode of the X-Files no matter where you jump in, right? Where the setup is the interesting part of the serial, where it's you've got this interesting idea of these two people investigating, right? Versus something like Breaking Bad, where it's a whole story. It's 5 seasons of a story. It's basically one long novel, essentially. But each piece does have to sit on its own because it's television. So you have to be able to enjoy it in these mini arc chunks, right? That all build up to a big arc.
Yeah, I think the Wire is another great example of something where it exists as a kind of TV novel in a way, but each individual episode still works by itself. And I think you can look at some more modern, more recent serials that have gone out on Netflix, Disney Plus, and that lot, and you do sometimes they seem to get a little bit muddled up in this respect, because you will sometimes have episodes where you'll get to the end, you're like, nothing really happened there. What was that episode all about? Which, if it was a
Yeah.
scene in a film, be completely fine, or a chapter in a novel or something. But in a serial, in an episodic series show, it can leave the pacing feeling kind of weird.
I don't know if you're
But
talking about The Walking Dead, but I'm going to bring The Walking Dead in for a kicking on that one. So,
right, yes, yeah. I think
yeah.
we watch a lot of the sort of Marvel and Star Wars stuff with our son, have done, and some of those just they don't know if they're doing a TV show or a movie. And it ends up
Mm,
being this kind of really long movie that is just peculiar.
yeah.
I think it's sometimes when you get filmmakers who are really great at making movies, and then they get excited by the budgets and the fanciness of TV these days, but then the storytelling requirements are slightly different. Anyway, we're probably getting slightly off topic there. In terms of the write the manuscript first or don't,
Mm,
there are pros and cons to each direction. So in terms of writing the manuscript first, which is not something I do, and neither do you, Sally, but like the reason to do it, I think, is pretty clear, because you can do much better quality control straight off the bat, basically, because you've written the whole thing. You can write it, you can go through as many edits as you want, just like you would if you were writing a traditional kind of novel. The stakes are lower because you've got the thing. So whenever you press go on the serial, you can know for sure that the story exists. You're not going to run into any problems along the way. And as a consequence of that, and I think this is the main thing, it's going to be far less stressful, I think, for some people. And I think also, this is probably with you as well, but I write in a very linear fashion. So, I might write a non-linear story, but the way I write tends to be, I start at chapter 1 and I keep writing until I finish the book. Whereas if you're a writer who, you do the start and then you write the end because you already have a great idea of that, and then you've got a cool chapter in the middle and you do that, and you hop around and then you piece it together into a story at the end, or maybe you don't even find the story until you've written loads of stuff and then you jumble it around. If you're that kind of writer, which obviously is completely legit, but you pretty much will have to write the manuscript first before serializing, I think,
right.
because you can only write and
Yeah.
publish as you go if that is the order in which you write. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would say if you're a discovery writer, I'm not a huge fan of the plotter pantser terminology, but if you're a pantser, um, then I would say, yeah, if you're a pantser, you're probably not going to enjoy the process of posting week to week if you don't have the story already written. Like, I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that, I think it will be more stressful because you're also telling yourself the story in ways that can get really overwhelming. um, and again, worth a try if it's something you want to do. But I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who's more of a discovery writer, and I just think I would feel more comfortable, especially if I'm starting with just an idea and I don't really know where it's going yet. It would feel so much better to have the private experience of writing it out, and then as you post it week to week, you can make whatever changes you kind of need to make as you go to have the cohesive whole, right? Um, yeah, I think I can't relate personally because it's just like I said, I find that the private experience of writing something out, I kind of need somebody driving me, even if it's just knowing that an audience is waiting for it. I kind of need that for my serials anyway. And I need to feel that I'm telling the story to somebody.
Yeah,
So,
no, definitely. I mean, I think I've told this story on my newsletter before, but despite saying that I wanted to be a writer from a very young age, I spent 30 years not really doing that. After I left school, and it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I had a go at doing a serial, just as a one-off fun exercise. This might be this sounds quite fun. Let's do like a 5-chapter serial, which then turned into like 70 chapters or something. But what I discovered accidentally, just because I'd always been writing, but I never finished anything. Like I'd always get distracted by another project, or I'd get bored
Same.
of the project, or whatever the reason was. I'd write intensively for a few weeks, then I'd have 6 months where I didn't write anything, and I was just generally a bit of a useless writer. When I started doing serials, suddenly I was writing every single week and coming back every week really reliably. And this was like I had like 3 readers or something, in the early days. But it could be one reader, but it flicks a little switch in my brain where I suddenly find it very easy to come back to the typewriter. I don't use a typewriter. I don't know why I said that. Back to the keyboard, and hammer out another chapter. And I was really startled by this because all of us, it was like this little productivity hack for my brain, which I've been using ever since, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if this is controversial to say, but over time I've realized that I love to write and I love being a writer. But I think what's driving me and the passion behind it is actually that I enjoy telling stories. I enjoy being a storyteller. And if I had
Mm-hmm.
access to other ways of doing that, I might learn a different skill. Like if I was somebody who wanted to like really devote myself to illustration, maybe I would do it that way. Or if filmmaking really, I mean, I love film, but I just don't really have the passion to do it that way. But writing is it is the canvas that I've chosen for telling stories. And I do think there's a difference because I think that there are people who enjoy the process of writing just for its own sake. And those are maybe the people who are more successful at writing an entire chunk of something or an entire story because they can enjoy the process of that as it's going without needing that external feedback or just even that give and take that you get from an audience. But serializing really taught me this. Like I do enjoy telling my stories to other people. And not that I wouldn't write if there was no one around, but I think it would look and feel very different. So
Yeah. I think
yeah.
if a story is just on a computer hard drive or in a drawer somewhere, it's a very different kind of experience to when you're in the moment putting stuff out and there's people on the other end responding to it, and I find it keeps me. It's like a motivation thing, but also like an honesty thing because I have to
Right.
come back because I know there's some random person somewhere in the world who discovered my story inexplicably. So now I have to go and write chapter 2.
I mean, you made a
And
promise. Essentially, you made a promise. You said, I'm going to start this thing. So
yeah,
I should end it.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's clearly situations where writing a full manuscript first is going to suit particular types of writers, or if someone wants to reduce the stress level and do a serial in a kind of not a safe way, but a controlled way, I suppose.
Yeah.
But equally, if anyone watching is in the same boat that I was in, and sounds like you have a little bit of this as well, where you never quite finish things, or you struggle to kind of get past the 20,000 word mark, or whatever it is. Doing a serial, I think, is like a secret little productivity thing
The
that
cheat
anyone
code.
who's struggling to write longer projects can use it, and suddenly they're like, oh,
Yeah.
everything's coming together, and I've got a reason to come back. That isn't just it's not you don't have to be completely self motivated because there's this sort of other person, people on the other end helping you do it as well.
Yeah.
Um, just reading Scatterbrain's question here. That's a good name. So Scatterbrain just said, to what degree should someone who always wants to be many weeks ahead just write a whole manuscript? That is a good question. We will talk about buffers, but yeah, I think to that question in particular, the best buffer is to just write the whole manuscript because then it's done. Um, my experience of buffer is that, as in being, say, 10 chapters ahead of where you're currently publishing, for example. My experience of buffers is that they're brilliant and they disappear really fast.
Yeah. I have only had one serial on Substack where I had any kind of buffer, and it was my very first one. And it was only because I had written the first few chapters back well before Substack. And so I had a little bit of runway to start with. I have never had a buffer since. And I'm not saying I'm happy about that. It's just I think it's difficult for me to conceptualize writing ahead for whatever reason. I don't know. I think that you're right. They get eaten up really quickly. I think when you think of a buffer, it sounds like a great idea, but that does require you to like keep
Yeah.
going. Like you have to keep writing it.
Yeah. I mean, buffers are undeniably a brilliant idea. Anyone
Yeah.
who can do them, let me know how you do it. Because like with Triverse, I think I had a 6 to 10 week buffer at the start.
Mm.
And then, I don't know, you're busy at work one week, then you're ill, and you're like, it's okay, I've got a buffer. And then all of a sudden you don't have a buffer anymore. So
Yeah.
what can
The
you do?
buffer is gone.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, decision one is write the whole manuscript or publish as you go. Very individual. Like there's no right or wrong way of doing it, but I think anyone watching will know which one they're naturally gravitating towards. I think, and then particularly if you're writing and publishing as you go. So, Sally, would you outline ahead of time? Not outline? How much would you do? So, let's say there's no buffer, we're writing a chapter and publishing it that week, and that's how we're doing it the whole time. But how much can you see ahead of where you are? Like, how do you handle that?
So I am an outliner. I don't start a serial unless I have an outline. And I hear myself saying that and I'm shocked because when I was a younger writer, I was very against the idea of outlines. It just felt like you're kind of pre-writing the story. And I was like, no. But I swear by them now. And so um I use the same structure now every time I serialize, which I didn't have when I first started, but now that I've done it a few times, I have now a structure that I try to like a skeleton that I try to hang all of my serials on now. And it's basically a modified version of the Blake Snyder beat sheet, which not to name drop, but that just you can find it online. You don't even have to buy the book. It's online somewhere. Um, and the Blake Snyder beat sheet is it's one of many story structures. There's, the Dan Harmon story circle. There's, the snowflake method, which I've never really looked into, but I know some people swear by. Um, it is now to the point where I have a bit of a instinctual framework, and I tend to break it into 12 pieces because I like to do 12-week serials. And that just keeps it nice and short and sweet. And I'll sometimes add an epilogue onto the end if I feel like I need like one last hurrah at the end of something. But yeah, I break my stories up into 12 pieces, and the first few pieces I try to outline in a pretty detailed way. So like the first chapter 2 or 3, I try to have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen, and then the later chapters is maybe like 1 or 2 bullet points of like, and then this kind of needs to happen, and then this kind of needs to happen, and then so as I go through, I add more details as things are filling in as I'm writing. But I do also like to have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to end, because as much fun as it is to kind of free fall your way to the end, I think the end does matter, especially in a 12-week serial. It's good to at least have a concept of where these characters are going to end up. And that's why the beat sheet helps me, because it's very clear of like what the opening and closing images of your story is supposed to look like. It kind of takes you through that. But again, people can use whatever story structure they like. But yes, I am definitely an outliner. And that just makes me feel more comfortable as I go, that I'm not completely making it up as I go along. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I do outline, but yeah, it's kind of, I like to think that it gets fuzzier and more blurry the further off it is. And you do these 12 episode serials, so you're quite disciplined in like the scale and scope. I'm not. Like my serials tend to be enormous and ridiculous. But for that reason, it is really important for me to kind of know where I'm going. But what I don't do is write out like the plot beat by beat by beat by beat, because the problem, I think the risk of outlining in too much detail is that once you told yourself that story through outlining, the actual writing process can become quite boring. So you need to find that sweet spot of enough details so that you don't get lost in the story, but you still leave enough gaps so that as the writer, when you're writing it, you're still discovering stuff and going, oh, didn't think of this. This is cool.
Well,
Um,
and you allow for the story to live. So I think that's important too, is that if you outline completely and you stick so carefully to your outline that it starts to get you need to kind of leave room. Well, I say you need to. I like to leave room for movement as I'm posting when I realize, oh, that character actually, I don't think I should introduce them there. I think they should come in later. Or like, you kind of have to
yeah.
having a little bit of wiggle room, I think is good. Yeah. I don't forget where I was going with that. But yeah, I think that it's important to outline, like you said, outline enough that it gives you lights along the path, but not so much that you feel like you've followed the Google Earth map all the way to the end and you already know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I tend to think of it as having kind of like little waypoints, like
Yeah.
sort of key events. So I know that at some point in the future, this thing is going to happen, and it's a really big pivotal moment in the story. How exactly I get from here to there can flex, but there's a destination in mind, even if I, take a wiggly route to get there. But it means that I'm never going to get so lost that I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with this story anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
And there was
and I
there
think,
was a question in the chat about serial lengths and like optimal serial lengths. It kind of went past me, so I can't find it again. And I think like that's always going to be the evergreen question that everyone's going to ask of like, what's the perfect serial length? I don't think there is one because it just depends on how long your story needs to be. Um, and I think we'll come to some other later on, some other kind of topics that have to do with that. But
yes, yeah,
yeah,
there's
just want
because
to make
there's
sure that
story.
it wasn't ignoring their question.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's story implications in terms of length, but there's also
Yeah.
practical logistics, which we'll get to in a bit.
Yeah.
Um, the last thing I'll say about outlining, and this is particularly, if you're writing and publishing as you go, the reason to outline, at least to some degree, is because you can then do effective foreshadowing of some sort. It depends again what kind of story you're writing, but the kind of stuff I do, I like to layer things in at the start that are going to pay off down the line. But
Mhm.
because I'm not writing the manuscript entirely up front, that's quite hard to do unless you have an outline. So I know certain things are going to happen. Um, and I've seen it described as it's like throwing a load of balls into the air, and you're going to catch some of them, and
Mhm.
some of them you're just going to forget about. But the reader doesn't necessarily know which ones you didn't bother to catch.
Right.
So I've always quite liked that metaphor. Um,
Yeah. I like that. That's good.
yes. Okay. So uh, structure. That's the next thing on my long list of notes. Um, And yeah, this kind of gets into length stuff as well, because if you've written a manuscript and maybe you wrote it more like a novel, perhaps, so you've got novel length chapters, for example, that the question is, do you just publish those chapters, or should you restructure it slightly, chunk it up in a different way, change the word count?
Mhm.
Like I tend to aim for sort of 1,200 to 1,500 words per chapter, quite often go longer than that. So it's not like a hard and fast rule or anything. It's just a sort of general target, I suppose. But like, what do you do if you've got 6,000 word chapters and then you've got a 500 word chapter? And like, any thoughts around that?
It depends. I'm trying to figure out how to say this because I had at least one serial where I got a little lackadaisical with my word counts and I was crawling up over 5,000 every so often. And I'm grateful that I had an audience for that serial, but I don't know that I would do that again. My It's a little dangerous to give any hard and fast rules on Substack, and maybe not just in Substack, but just in serializing in general. But I would say when it's an online readership, anything between that like 1,500 and like 4,000 as an upper ceiling is optimum in my opinion. I think when you get up and over 4,000 words, people see the little how many minutes it takes to read, and that changes the way they engage with the chapter. So they might not be as willing to just open it and start reading if they know it's going to take them 20 plus minutes to read, right? Um Yeah, and so I think that does have to do with, like, how you chunk up like, again, since I write as I go, I shoot for a particular word count as I'm writing. So I don't know what that would necessarily look like if you're chunking up a manuscript, but I think that's where you come to, like, cliffhangers and ending your serial chapters in such a way that it feels both satisfying and also compelling because you want people to come back for the next thing. So it can be a genuine cliffhanger where you have left something unsaid or something's about to happen and then you leave people off. Um, or it can be just enough that like you're kind of building this relationship between characters or this compounding mystery or something that is going to make people want to come back. And that is going to be individual for where, each story is, right? What it is.
Yeah, I think some sort of consistency is a good idea. Like it's not super essential, but if you use the analogy of watching a serial on television, for example, if you got used to half an hour episodes and then suddenly there's a 2 hour episode, and then you
Yeah.
watch another episode and it's 10 minutes long, you'd be like, "What the hell's going on here? This is incredibly confusing." It would be weird. So I think with like prose fiction serials online, you need to have that in mind a little bit as well, because if your readership gets used to something that takes them 10 minutes to read, then you should probably try and stick loosely around that. Whereas if every one of your chapters is 6,000 words, like if that's what your readership is into, because that's what it's always been, that's probably cool as well. But if you suddenly switch to 300 word chapters, that's going to confuse them and vice versa. So it's just, it's figuring out maybe ahead of time a little bit, like what is the shape of this thing going to be? And you've
Yeah.
got the practical considerations and then you've got the story requirements, and it's kind of seeing where they meet in the middle.
Yeah, I think something that can be a little metaphysical to talk about, but I think comes up a lot and it doesn't really get spoken out loud is that so much of the relationship between readers and writers online in particular is about trust, right? And trust includes a certain level of consistency. Consistency doesn't mean it has to be the same. Like it doesn't have to be weekly. It doesn't have to be whatever. But like you set the expectations and readers will respond to the confident way that you set that expectation, right? If you say like, here's what I'm going to do. I hope you join me. People are much more likely to be on board with that and say like, yeah, it sounds like fun. I want to do that, right? And just as much as possible maintaining that reader trust as you go. And if you have to break something that you're very honest about that and communicate and say like, "Hey, I'm sick this week. I can't write a chapter." Or, "Hey, I got, I just had a situation with a serial that I started last summer that um the way it started was a little bit strange, just it was outside of my normal and it went longer than it was supposed to go and I was just starting to feel so unconfident about that because I felt like I set an expectation and I wasn't meeting it. And so I think having as much communication as possible up front really helps, where you just say, like, here's my intention, here's the expectation I'm setting. I would love for people to join me in this and let's just see what happens together, And like people really do seem to respond to that. I think readers enjoy that.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's nice if you're publishing via your own newsletter, doesn't have to be Substack, whatever you're using. This is slightly different to platforms like Wattpad, where it's very much more algorithmic and it's kind of Wattpad is deciding who gets to see what in a much bigger way. Uh, with a newsletter, like the people that subscribe to your newsletter just sort of inevitably are the best people to be reading your newsletter because
Yeah.
that's why they subscribed. And
Right.
that's a kind of cumulative, interesting thing that happens over time. But, whatever kind of reader you want and uh, whatever you want your newsletter to be, that is what will naturally kind of sculpt the audience around that concept. If you want to change it down the line, you certainly can, as long as you take them on the ride with you and explain what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just while we're on sort of structural stuff, and Sally, I know you do a lot of editing. Like people work with you to edit their books, and an interesting thing, particularly if you're writing and publishing as you go is you have to think really hard. I find about like what is the narrative structure of this thing, because you can't necessarily you don't want to be finding that as you're writing. Like and this is very much fundamentals. Like, is this first person? Is this third person? Am I sticking to the point of view of one character or multiple characters? Am I switching point of view mid scene, or is it locked to this chapter, or even to like 10 chapters per character? All of those kind of questions deserve a little bit of thought up front once you kind of have a sense of what your story is, because a bit like you were saying about the confidence thing, if you confidently know what the structure of your story is, that can really lift a serial. And it makes it feel less like you are just writing it and publishing it as you go. It feels more
Right.
intentional, like you've got a plan.
Yeah. And I think my answer would be slightly different for people who are kind of newer to writing than it would be for people who've been writing for a while and they just want to try out a serial because it's a different idea. I would say if you're newer to writing in general and you want to try serializing, you just find a structure that you enjoy reading slash watching and kind of reverse engineer it from there, right? Like if there's a certain book that you love or whatever, like start with that. Start with kind of what they do and sort of think about, is it in first person? Is it in third person? Like, what does it kind of feel like? Was it, and like, just, you know what? Like imitation is how we learn. So like start there, right? If you are a kind of an old hand at writing, but you want to try serials for the first time, I would say just whatever you pick, let it be something that you know you can enjoy for weeks at a time or months at a time. Because I think that first person sounds like fun when you're, for me anyway, I'm not a huge fan of writing in first person, but people who love first person probably would love this. But for me, a first person narrative would be great for the first couple chapters. And then I would eventually get really tired of it. And I'd be like, I'm so tired of being locked in this person's head. I want to do something else. Um, so just whatever you decide. And also, again, not to be kind of wishy-washy or metaphysical about this, but like, what does the story want? Like, what does the story require? Because, and that's why outlining can help. Because if you know later on down the line that a character, like you need to be able to see something happen that the character's not going to be there for, you got to plan for that. Does that mean you are an omnipotent narrator that's looking all over the place? Or does that mean you're locked in somebody's head? Like you got to just think through, what is the story requiring of you? And then the worst part of it, commit. If you're halfway through this thing and you don't like the way you structured it, too bad. You got to keep going. Like, and that's part of the good thing about serials, and also the difficult thing is that people get to a point where they're like, I wouldn't have done this way if I had known. And it's like, that's okay. It's a first draft. It's literally a public first draft. So you just got to keep going. Like,
Yeah.
and you might actually find, if you keep going, that you like it more than you thought you did by the time you're done. But you get stuck in the messy middle and you can be like, I hate this, So I
Yeah.
speak from experience. It does happen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it probably sounds very stressful to anyone who's not tried it, but committing to what you've already published in a serial and having to figure creative ways out of potential issues that you've created for yourself is actually quite rewarding. Like, as
Yeah.
long as it works out, I suppose. But it usually does, because we're all creative people. But like in Driverse, in the very first chapter, I put in this one little detail, which was kind of just for mood, but turned out like 2 years later to be a bit of a plot hole accidentally. And I was like, oh, that's annoying. And if I was just writing the manuscript ahead of time, I'd just go back and take that line out. Instead, I was like, no, I've published that. That the reader's read that bit. I've committed to it. So I've got to try and figure out what to do about this. And actually the solution to that problem was really interesting. And that's something I find really exciting about serials, because it does force you to explore creative solutions that if you were just writing offline, writing the manuscript in a more kind of normal way, you'd never encounter that creative solution, because you just go back and edit it.
And I
And that
think I think that's
shouldn't
something
be underestimated.
I think that's something that every writer should know and internalize, is that limitations are good, actually. I think we like the idea of being, you know, imaginative cosmonauts. We can do whatever we want. We could, it's like, yeah, true. But actually, setting limitations for yourself is where you're going to find some of the most interesting things that'll come out of your brain because you do. You have to make connections where you didn't know they were going to be, or you have to wiggle your way out of something and make sure that it's still compelling and interesting and fun. And I think, yeah, if when in doubt, I tend to think, have you put enough limitations on yourself? I think sometimes people get stuck because the sky's the limit and they think they could do whatever. Well, put some limitations on yourself and see what happens. You might actually find your way out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Two areas that, I mean, are obviously important to any story, which are the themes the story is exploring and the characters within the story. You've talked about characters already today. But these two things can be really helpful for serials. Obviously, that's a completely obvious statement. But what I mean is they can kind of function as like almost like having a compass. So, particularly if you're writing as you go, having really strong themes, like as long as every chapter is exploring, poking at that theme in some way. Like it doesn't matter if your story's kind of going over here and then changing, and then you've done something weird, and like as long as it's on topic, I suppose. To the reader, it will feel very deliberate. It will feel like you're going in the right direction, and that it's all on purpose and it all makes sense. Like if you don't really have that nailed down from the start, and themes can, they can evolve over time. But I find it if at the very start, I'm like, right, this book, no matter what happens in it, is about this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And then as long as each chapter is investigating that in some capacity, it seems to sort of work out.
Yeah. I tend to start with, I kind of tend to like back into my themes a little bit because I start with character motivation. I'm very big on that for myself. If I don't know what a character wants, then I don't have a story yet. And so I think, um, for me, the theme emerges when I answer the question, what does this character want more than anything in the entire world? What do they need that they don't know that they need yet? And then, like, how far are they willing to go to get the thing that they think they need? And I think once I have those questions in my mind, especially if I'm able to come up with that for a couple of different characters and have them all kind of either complement or contrast with each other, like have varying answers to the same basic questions that can sort of play off of each other in interesting ways. Like in my serial that I just finished called Smoke Mouth, like my themes were so on the nose, it was ridiculous, but it was actually kind of fun to write a story that was so blatant about the themes being about like the importance of community and family and having these characters, certain characters who just do not want to have anything to do with anybody else, having to soften over time. They think
Mhm.
they want something, but what they actually need is to become part of a found family. And like that was such a motivator for me in the writing of it because it was like, okay, regardless of what happens in this next scene, like you said, regardless of what happens, I know I'm going to hit these certain beats of like things they're going to learn, things they're going to be stymied by, or like obstacles they're going to bump into, but they all have to do with this desire that they have. Um, and then like the complementary thing they're going to learn from that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And those,
Yeah.
the themes can be very broad brush, like
Yeah.
very top level. Like you say, like quite on the nose and obvious. But like, it's not like on the front cover, you're putting those themes. It's like
Not
the way
called
you,
this book community.
yeah, exactly. The
Right.
way you then explore those themes can be quite nuanced and subtle and to whatever degree you want. But knowing them yourself means that, yeah, you can, it means it makes it safer to kind of go off the path, like the main plot path. You can go roaming off into the woods, but because you've got that theme, you can like check your compass and be like, oh yeah, I need to get back over there and get back to what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and 9 times out of 10, like, just here's a little peek behind the curtain editing. 9 times out of 10 when, an author asks me or, like, they're asking me for help because they've reached a plot cul-de-sac or they're struggling, almost invariably, the issue is that their character's motivation is not strong enough or they just have kind of forgotten what it is. And
Yeah.
they're kind of letting their character be sort of like pulled along by the plot. And it's like, no, you need somebody who's motivated. Like they want something, and that is going to, even on days when you don't know what the plot is going to be like, the character running forward is going to be what keeps you writing, because it's like, oh yeah, I know what they want, and they need to get through this next thing to get there, you know?
Yeah.
So
Your little list of like things you jot down for each character ahead of time. I really like those. An extra one I'd add to that, I quite often like to add a bit, which is what is this character's secret? So every character I give a little secret. Might not have anything to do with the story. It might never come up. It's just something in their past or in the way they see the world or whatever it is, that's some kind of secret that they probably don't want other people to know. And that can then have really interesting impacts on like lines of dialogue, the way they respond to stuff. And like, you never have to go into it. You never have to tell the reader about this thing, but it just gives them all the kind of quirky little inflections that hopefully makes the characters, more distinct and
yeah,
have slightly different voices, but in
I like that.
quite a fun way.
That's very good. I like that. I'm gonna add that to my list too.
Yeah, no, it's good fun. And there's sometimes that secret might end up becoming a major subplot or something,
Yeah.
or is never mentioned. Right. So next, this is very much logistical stuff, and you touched upon this earlier, but it's the schedule or
Yeah.
schedule. I don't know. How do you say it? You schedule or schedule over there?
Well, my husband is from Scotland, so we actually do say schedule a lot, but schedule over here.
Excellent. And this is a really interesting one. So there's no kind of hard and fast rule. Like you can publish a chapter every week. You can do a chapter every fortnight, every month. You can do daily chapters if you really want to, although probably only if it's a contained thing. Like you can do whatever makes sense and whatever you want to do. As long as it's consistent again. Like you don't want to be doing weekly chapters, then suddenly it's daily chapters, and then you don't publish anything for 6 months and it's just chaotic and crazy.
Yeah.
But I think what's important to do up front, this might be the most important thing, is to figure out how much time you actually have as a writer. Because if you get that wrong, you're going to have a really bad time, basically.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I think uh I think people think that weekly, I don't know. I think sometimes people have a bit of time blindness when it comes to some of these things. Weekly feels like a good clip until you're feeling behind, or you've had one week where things aren't going well and it can get a little bit like, ugh. Um, but then what also needs to be kept in mind is that your readers are busy people. And if you put too much gap between each chapter, you're going to have to do a lot more work to like remind them every week of what happened the previous week. My wonderful mother reads my stories, and she's the one who actually kind of said like, "Hey, it'd be great if you put like a little previously on on each chapter, just like a little basic summary of each thing that happened, because a week feels like nothing, but it can be a long time in a life of someone who's busy with work and busy with family and busy with stuff. It's like, yeah, you need
yeah,
a reminder, you know. So I think weekly is a good clip, but like you said, I think it all comes down to what you're able to do, and what expectation you're willing to set with your readers of what they should expect from you. Because it can be every
yeah,
month if you want, that's fine. But just remember that you might have to do a little bit more work on the front end to make sure that they know what's happening, you know.
yeah. And if you decide that 10,000 word chapters are the best way to tell the story, then maybe that is a monthly thing. But it's bigger installments when they come along. So I think my kind of mathematical formula for this is that you should try and estimate how much time you think you have per week to dedicate to your writing and your serial. Taking into consideration all the other things you do, if you've got the day job, if you've got like household stuff, family stuff to be doing, all of that, estimate how much time you think you have and then divide it by 3.
Yeah.
And that's probably actually how much time you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because things always get in the way. When I did my first serial, I basically figured out that I could have one evening a week where I could definitely for sure work on the serial without like compromising like family stuff that I wanted to do and should be doing without getting in the way of jobs and going to the shops and having to clean the house or whatever it was. Like one evening a week. And I'm not even talking about the whole evening. This was sort of, from about 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. Everything else was done. And I was like, right, I can definitely, this is my time to do the writing. I've kind of expanded it over time. But at the start, I was like, I can definitely commit to this. And then that dictated the pace at which I could write and publish the story.
Yeah. This is going to be very much a do as I say, not as I do kind of a, a conversation on my end, because I mean, I did it. I published, but there were some weeks where I would wait right up until the last second. And I remember certain episodes of my serial Freelance and Fish Maids in particular, where I would wake up at 6 a.m. Friday morning, knowing that it was scheduled to go out at 7, and I would be doing last minute edits from 6 to 7. And I would like sit back while it went out. And I was just like, this is not great. I shouldn't be doing this. So yeah, I think you're right that it's good to have a realistic idea. Um, not just of your schedule, but also of your own inclinations. Because if you're a procrastinator, like I have been ever since I was in school, I've always been a procrastinator. And unfortunately, I've always been a successful procrastinator. I was one of those people who could do it and still get an okay grade. And so it was always affirmed in me that that's okay to do. um, but it's not a great idea. So I would just say, like, know thyself when it comes to your habits, and figure out the best way to do it in such a way where you're not compromising quality for the sake of um getting it out there, just because, like, there's a little bit, I think with serials there is a little bit of anti-perfectionism. You do have to kind of reach a certain point where you're like, it's out, I'm not touching it. It's an email anyway, so I can't edit it. Like, no one's going to see the change on the email. Um, but at the same time, that doesn't mean being sloppy just because, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
You know.
also, it factors into, stress levels and general sanity. Because if you think you can do like 3 evenings a week, or if you're like, oh, I'll dedicate the whole of Monday to my writing, and then it turns out actually you can only do a couple of hours, like if that becomes apparent over time and you're already publishing a serial, that's going to get really stressful and tricky. And like what we don't really want is anyone having a horrible time doing a serial. Like doing a serial should be exciting and fun and really invigorating. And yeah, it gets a little tight and down to the wire sometimes, and that's all part of the fun. But yeah,
Right.
it should always be fun rather than like a horrendous experience.
Yeah, if you're having a nervous breakdown every time you have a chapter due, then you're kind of, you don't have to live like that. It's okay.
So,
You don't have to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
tweak the process. And I guess that's the thing. Like if it feels really difficult and horrible, then there's probably something somewhere that's not quite
Yeah.
right for your style of writing. It might be that you do need to write the manuscript ahead of time, or you absolutely need a 10-week buffer because that's how your brain works, or whatever it is. Maybe you need to outline more or outline less. I don't know, but yeah, don't just
Yeah.
sort of suffer endlessly.
Yeah. And I think that's why, like, I would say, I mean, I'm biased because I've done, I think, like I said, I counted, and I think it's 9 serials now on Substack because they're relatively short. But um, I think having multiple smaller projects like that allows you to tweak and experiment. And so maybe for your first time out, if it's your first time doing a serial, like, go ahead and commit to a 5-part serial, or a 10-part serial, or something that's like slightly shorter, something that you can just experiment with so that you're not locked in. Because
Yeah,
I mean, I think it would be difficult to decide that you're going to post a 30 chapter, like multiple subplot serial, and then realize, like, ooh, this is a lot more horrible than I thought, because I don't have the understanding of my own process yet to know
yeah,
how I can enjoy this, So it's okay to start simple if that's what you want to do, or just jump in with both feet. why not?
Yeah,
Do whatever you need
exactly.
to do.
And that is the other part of the equation, I suppose, which is trying to figure out how long you think your story is going to be.
Mhm.
And, even just to do a very rough degree, like, is this, something that can be done in, 5 to 10 chapters? Or are we talking like 40 plus or something even bigger than that? Like, well, what is having that sense ahead of time is really important, because then you can scale everything else appropriately in your expectations and what kind of commitment you've got. But the other thing, and like, let's assume it's a weekly serial,
Mm.
and my mathematical ability here is going to astound you, but if you have like a 10 chapter serial and it's going out weekly, it's going to take 10 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. But equally, if you construct a like 70 chapter story and it's like the best story in the world, um, that's a lot of weeks. It's a lot
A
of
lot of weeks.
time. And if you swap it around, so you're not looking at it in terms of chapters, you're looking at it in terms of time and how long you're committing to doing this thing. That puts everything in a slightly different context. But it's quite important to do up front, I think. Just because if you think, oh, I've got this cool story, and then you're like, then you look at it in the light of, I'm going to be writing and publishing this for 2 years. Like, that
Yeah.
feels very different.
Yeah. I started with the publishing, like, before coming up with the 12-week thing as my like ideal. I started with the publishing constraint because over on Tailbones, I work in seasons, like 3-month chunks of the year. And so 12 weeks was like, okay, well, I've got 12 weeks to do this story. So I got to break this into 12 pieces. Right. And it worked for me also because some of my favorite uh, storytelling is like short form storytelling, you know? And so like it worked out in my favor in that way. But yeah, if you're somebody who, who wants to write a longer story or wants to be in it for the long haul, it's important to think in those terms of like, do I actually want to keep doing this
Yeah,
for 2 years, or a year and a half or whatever it is? It's a commitment. And again, the longer it is, the more of an impetus you're going to have of like readers who want you to keep going. Like
yeah,
they're gonna they're investing their time in this. They're gonna want to know how it ends. So
yeah.
yeah.
That's a really good point, actually. Particularly the longer a serial becomes, but even shorter ones. Like, the worst possible thing that can happen is that you don't finish your serial, because if you don't finish the serial, nobody's going to come back and read your next one,
No.
basically,
Yeah.
because like, it's such a trust exercise, and that's kind of the biggest pressure point. I think the biggest kind of point of stress, because it's why you want to be absolutely certain that that's the story you want to be writing. Because if you get like a third into it and you're like, oh, not really enjoying this story, that's a
Yeah.
problem. Because if you're just writing a novel, if you're not publishing it as a serial, not a problem. Just put it to one side, start on the next project. If you're doing a
Mhm.
serial, you sort of have to finish it if you want people to keep reading your stuff online and keep coming back for future projects. So yeah, it's a tricky one. But that's why you have to really think before you commit to actually publishing.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it better to finish it and think of it as a first draft. Like I have a few serials I can even think of off the top of my head that I've written that I wasn't a huge fan of them by the time I was done. Like I was kind of like, okay. But I'm glad they're done. They
Yeah.
needed to be done. I'm glad they're done. And now I have a completed thing that I can go back and revise and play with or just
Mhm.
use for idea compost, like it can be used for I can, kind of mine it for other ideas. Um, but yeah, I would be disappointed in myself if I hadn't finished them. It would always feel like a thing that was undone,
Yeah.
and readers would see it as a thing that's undone as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think, if you publish something that like isn't as good as you hoped it would be, and maybe even readers are like, yeah, it was okay, wasn't as good as I hoped, but actually those readers are probably still more likely to come back and read your next thing,
Yep.
um, because they're kind of invested in you as a writer, and they want, generally people want other people to succeed, like, just generally speaking. So if they read something and it's kind of okay, but then your next thing comes along and they give it a go and it's better, then that's really cool. But if you never finished the first like mediocre thing, then
Yeah.
those people might not come back for the really cool thing you do as a
Yeah.
follow up. Right. Well, we're getting close to the end of tonight's session. Next on my list was buffers, but I think we've talked quite a bit about buffers, so
Yeah,
we
I
can
think we
probably
kinda covered that. Yeah.
we can kind of skip over the buffer, which is generally what I do when I'm writing a serial as well. So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Exactly.
So the last thing to talk about is presentation, and we're not going to kind of get too into the weeds on this because I think it could be like a whole separate thing where we kind of get into some of the more technical platform focused side of things. And we don't want to, we're doing this live stream on Substack, and a lot of people watching are going to be publishing their stuff on Substack, but we're trying to keep these chats fairly platform agnostic and to focus more on writing serials rather than using Substack specifically. But there are some bits and pieces that you just have to kind of have in place, I think, before you actually start. So just to go through them one by one, I suppose. So one is a cover, and it's not a book. It's not going to exist as a physical thing, or even necessarily as an ebook at first, or not for a while. But I still think having a book-shaped cover helps because readers that's how they think of a book, a story. Like if they see a book-shaped cover thing, even if it's not a book, it's actually a serial. They're like, aha, a story I can read.
Yeah.
But how do you go about doing your covers, Sally?
Well, what's funny is we might have found the first place where we don't necessarily align. I don't always start with a cover. Usually the cover comes later after I've written. I think what I would say my version of a cover is I do try to pick a genre of stock photo that is going to be the images I'm going to pick as much as possible. I try to keep a cohesion in the stock photos that I use for my different posts. So, um, yeah. So I don't pick all the stock photos initially, but I try to pick like a mood or a basic kind of tone that will stay as cohesive as possible throughout the serial. Um, but like when I do my covers for my ebooks and stuff like that, I've got a Canva account and a dream. I genuinely enjoy making covers. And I mean, you can do a lot of damage with Canva. I know it's not probably the thing that most professionals like to use, but I think, it's about thinking outside of the box. And honestly, I think the biggest thing is just studying covers that you like and like taking inspiration from those professionally made covers. And I mean, so many of those things are things you can absolutely do on your own covers. And it makes something feel so much more like I like to make a cover for my own like private enjoyment of a story because it makes it feel like a an object that I'll be able to hold someday. So I agree with you that I think it is important. It's fun to play with the aesthetics and the look of what this thing is going to look like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe rather than covers specifically, like having a visual identity is maybe what we're
Yeah.
talking about. So
Yeah.
because then when a new chapter goes up, ideally, if people have it in their feed or pops up in their inboxes or what have you, like if there's some kind of visual style to the thing, even if it's just stock images, I use stock images quite a lot. But as long as there's a consistent mood and style to it, or you're putting a frame on it of some sort that's distinct to that particular, whatever it is, so that when readers are doing all their busy things, it jumps up and they're like, oh, it's the next chapter of that thing I'm enjoying.
Yeah.
That's really
It gives
useful.
it an identity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think on along those lines, I with Triverse, I quite enjoyed creating like a custom scene break
Mm,
graphic, like just
those are
so
fun.
when a scene breaks just had a little thing, because you can just do a line or something, but actually if you have a little custom graphic that somehow relates to the book or the cover or what have you, that's quite fun. I think they're
Mm.
called dinkus,
Oh, really?
dinkuses, dinkai. I don't know those little
Mm.
bits. I think they were dinkus.
Well, and I will say, as another kind of a shot across the bow for people, it's a slightly off topic, but it's important. If um, when you send Substack posts to your e-reader, like your Kindle or something, you can share them with your e-readers. The native lines that Substack uses don't transfer over. So you can be flipping through a chapter, and if there's a line as a line break, it won't be there. So I like to encourage people to either put asterisks or an image or something that will actually like transfer over, because otherwise it can be very confusing as you're reading through and you're like, that feels like there should have been a scene break there, and it's because the line is missing. So there you go.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's an interesting tip. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, checking how things look on like the app in email on the web, because sometimes it doesn't always transfer or respond across different screen sizes in the way you might expect. So that's always worth a look. What else have I got here? I've got a blurb. I hate writing blurbs. They're really tricky. But even if it doesn't exist as a book yet, you're going to need some sort of intro, just so that when people are encountering this thing and thinking about reading it, there has to be something that just gives them what they need to know whether they actually want to read it or not. Particularly, if you've got to chapter 10 in your publishing schedule, and someone comes along, like, how do they know what this thing is? Because the intro is probably way back. So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having a blurb or like a brief synopsis that just also gives an idea of genre. I know like genre can be a little bit hazy, but I think it's just helpful for people to know. And I mean, I think you don't need to be shy either about inspirations. Like if it's similar to something, then go ahead and say that. That's what publishing does all the time. They say like, oh, if you're fans of this, and it's like, yeah, go ahead. I mean, if it's sort of similar to something else that you enjoy, then you're going to want readers of that thing or enjoyers of that thing to want to find you too. So yeah, go ahead and just whatever you need to do to get people in the door, right? It's not a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. What you also need is just generally, you want to make it as easy as possible for readers to navigate around your serial. And what this means will vary massively depending on what you're using to actually, like, where you're publishing it. So if you're publishing somewhere like Wattpad, like, it's designed for serials. So you get like a front page, you get a little drop down menu with all your chapters so they can just hop around it, that kind of thing. If you're publishing on a newsletter, like on Substack, you have to build a sort of equivalent yourself to the best of your abilities. So, a kind of intro page that maybe has your chapters listed there so people can find their way around. And then on the chapters themselves, you put little buttons to go like previous and next and jump back to the index. And it's a bit of a faff, but I think it's really important, because until I started doing that, like when I started doing that, I started to notice more readers appearing, basically.
Something that I try to harp on a lot is on Substack in particular, every email is someone's first email from you. So that top of your email is such crucial real estate. For, if someone has just subscribed to you and you're on chapter 5 of your serial, you want that first little bit at the top to be, here's what this is, here's what section it is, here's how you can go back to the beginning, because if you want to start over from the beginning, then here's how you how you do that. Here's what happened previously. Here's what's about to happen. Here we go. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be a whole big, multiple paragraphs of housekeeping. In fact, I try to discourage people from doing too much housekeeping in their serial chapters. But like, I do think this is something that I see all the time when folks, I have a fiction bulletin that I do twice a month called Tailstack News, and I just post, different Substack projects that people are working on, and people will send me their serials that they're starting. And something I notice right away is when they don't have a table of contents, they just have a chapter 1. And there's no way to get back to the beginning. There's no way to like navigate through. And I always just worry that this person, and especially if you go to their homepage and it's just chapters scattered all over the place and there's nowhere to go for like that main hub of here's a list of the links. And I know it's annoying. Like you said, it's a bit of a faff on Substack because they don't give us that. Like they don't give us but it really isn't that hard to do. You just have to create a separate page for it. And actually, I'll plug Simon because you have a bunch of really great resources on like how to build some of this infrastructure. I think I used some of your articles early on when I was first putting my stuff together. So And I honestly like find people who do it really well and just copy what they're doing because
Yeah.
no one has invented like no one has created a way to do this that's trademarked. So it's just like copy
No.
what people are doing that are doing a good job at this.
Yeah, we're all trying to figure it out. And yeah, like you say, when people don't have an index or a table of contents, it immediately makes everything harder. I think the other thing, if I go to someone's chapter, particularly if it's halfway through a serial, and that post immediately launches into the chapter, it's just first line is the fiction begins. Then it's like,
Yep.
"Oh, I don't know what the hell's going on here." So
Yeah.
yeah, having just you want to keep it minimal, but just having those
Mhm.
little helper bits at the top is really useful. Um,
Yeah.
and it's slightly easier to do now because they've added in on Substack. That is, they've added in the template feature where you can create templated chunks of text, including like buttons and links and images and what have you. So, if you wanted to create a sort of a top header bit with all your buttons and things, or if you wanted to list out your chapters as a little navigator, you can stick down the bottom that somebody mentioned in chat. Like that's easier to do now because you don't have to recreate it each time or go and copy and paste it from your previous one, and you can just make it as a template, press a button, in it goes. So yeah, it's getting easier. I've been hassling them for like 4 years to add some sort of table of contents thing, and I'll keep doing it basically. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm quite fortunate in that this is going to sound like a horrible brag. It's not supposed to, but because my newsletter has grown to a certain point, I didn't realize this, but when you get to a certain point, you get slightly more access to Substack behind the scenes people. Which for me, that means I'm basically going like table of contents, table of contents, table of
Yeah.
contents on repeat until they do it. So fingers
So
crossed.
you're the one that we hassle so that you can hassle them, is what you're saying.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that.
Yeah.
The last bit I've got written down here, which I mean, it ties into what we've just been saying, but if you're doing it via a newsletter, make sure that your welcome emails are kind of updated and up to date so that when someone new does subscribe, like in the little welcome email they get, it says like, "Oh, if you want to read my story, it's about this.
Mhm.
Here's chapter 1, or here's the index. Off you go." Because if someone subscribes and they just get the generic, like, "Thanks for subscribing," then they're like, "What do I do now?" And particularly, like in your case, if you've got multiple serials, you can use the welcome email to either send someone to kind of an overview page, or you can link to all of them, or whatever makes most sense, really.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think yeah, using the Substack infrastructure that they have given us to your best advantage. And again, yeah, like any time that you can plug something, lead someone somewhere, put a link to something else. Like I'm constantly using the footers of my short story posts as a again, prime real estate to put like, "Hey, did you enjoy this? Here's a link to something else I wrote." Like as much as possible giving readers the opportunity to stay in your orbit, because they want to. Like if they're there and they're enjoying it, then they want to keep going. They want to keep reading And so yeah, I think having a welcome email that's really clear. I know what a chore it is doing welcome emails. I personally hate updating my welcome emails, but it's important and it is the first thing that people see from you. And again, just having your homepage of your newsletter. I know it doesn't really matter if people are on the app, but it does matter if they're on desktop. Just having things pinned in certain ways so that it's tidy, so people, it does come down to your goals. And I try to tell people this that like if your goal is not to like have any of this be a certain way, then that's totally fine too. But I'm just saying, I think there are a lot of people who wonder what they're doing wrong and you're not doing anything wrong. It's just tidying things up and allowing readers, making it as streamlined as possible for them is going to go a long way toward building that trust that we were talking about and letting them know that you are in control and that you have some confidence, even if you don't feel that way. It's a posture of confidence, even if it's not real confidence quite yet. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
fake it till you
yeah,
make it.
exactly. And some of these things are like one-time things. Once you've done it, they're then just going to keep working for your
Yep.
stories long term.
Yep.
And yeah, could have big impacts. Uh, right. Well, that's everything I've got on my notes, and we've run over time anyway, so we should probably wrap it up
Yeah.
thereabouts.
Yep.
Um,
And we don't want to step on our own toes for next time either. So
no. So yeah, the loose plan for next time is to kind of fast forward to the next step, which is like while you're publishing, like you're in the middle of it. How do you keep going? What do you need to keep an eye on? Community stuff, comments, all that kind of thing.
Engagement, all that good stuff.
Yes. So like, yeah, once your serial exists and it's happening, like what's that like, and what do you do, and how do you make the best of it? But yeah, thank you
Yeah,
everyone for coming along, and thanks, Sally. This is good fun again.
absolutely. Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Exactly, and yeah, replay of this will be going up on both our newsletters. I'll be putting mine up on Monday, I think, so you can rewatch as many times as you want.
I'll throw some
That,
clips out on notes probably once they get generated. So
yeah, exactly. Brilliant. All right, well, we'll see you all next time, and thanks for coming along.
thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.